see me?
Okay, you can see the top on the, Good job, everybody.
Oh, and there I am.
Star of the silver screen. Are we starting with Aaron? Yep. Let's go here over to Aaron. All right, we're live.
For the earth forever turning, for the skies for every sea, for our lives, for all we cherish, sing we our joyful song of peace. For the mountains, hills, and pastures in their silent majesty, for the stars, for all the heavens, sing we our joyful song of peace. For the sun, for rain and thunder, for the seasons' harmony, for our lives, for all creation, sing we our joyful praise to thee. For the world we raise our voices, for the home that gives us birth. In our joy we sing, returning home to our blue-green hills of earth.
Good morning. My name is Linda Leibel, and I serve on the Board of Trustees of the Unitarian Universalist Church of Spartanburg this year. Thank you for joining us via live stream this morning. We know these are very unusual circumstances, and we are in a time of uncertainty in our community and around the world. In cooperation with many other churches and civic groups nationally and regionally, we have suspended all church activities until our Board of Trustees meets this Wednesday to determine a fuller plan with more information. This is an attempt to keep the congregation and the community safe by slowing down the spread of the coronavirus. As decisions about the coming weeks are made, we will send out updated information as soon as possible. If you have questions or concerns, please do not hesitate to reach out to our board members, Scott, or any member of our staff. Our job is to serve you. We are glad you've taken the time to connect with us this morning. Especially in times like these, we need each other. So let us begin this morning with gratitude that we have one another and that we can use technology like this to connect with one another, even when distance separates us. Thank you for being part of the congregation today. We are a people of faith and hope, and welcome.
Good morning. It is my privilege to teach about the religions of the world in many formats, with many different groups of people, at colleges, in community gatherings, and in this congregation. And when I talk about the world's religions, all of the ways that people manifest their spiritual lives, there is a principle that I find at the heart of all religious practice. I was talking to a group of students just a week ago about this before the reality of this pandemic came home to us here in Spartanburg. This principle is not love. I wish that it was, but it is not. Love is a form of this principle. There is something deeper, a structure in human spirituality in all of its innumerable forms. That principle at the heart of all religious practice is connection. Connection with whatever is deepest and best in the universe, and connection with one another. In my view, all religious and spiritual activity is oriented towards connecting us with one another and whatever is greater than us. We are living in a time when our usual means of connection, by being with one another, may carry with it danger. And yet when our worry and our need make connection something for which we long and on which we may depend, we have a means to act. We are challenged. How do we connect with one another when we cannot be physically together? Thank you for entering into that vitally important work by connecting with us today. To gather even in this way, separated by physical distance, but together in spirit, this matters.
This reading comes from the book by Kathleen Parker, Sacred Service in Civic Space, 300 Years of Community Ministry in Unitarian Universalism. We've been using this book over the month as part of our social justice emphasis. Our mutual human need. In a world as imperfect as our own, we are sometimes struck by the magnitude of our mutual human need. To minister to that world is to be open to that need and to connect with it at its deepest, most authentic level. It is here, in this place of recognized, shared vulnerability, that ministry takes place.
Sleight of hand, jump off the end into a clear lake. No one around. Just dragon flies, fantasize. No one gets hurt. You've done nothing wrong.
I want to thank everyone for what you have done to make today possible. There are less than 10 people here in the sanctuary with me, all of whom have a job to do: sound, video, checking to make sure the video feed is working, taking part in the service, improvising music and playing. Everyone here has a role, and everyone who is watching has a role too. It's strange to say, but by not being here, we have stepped into an active role to try to build community and to care for each other. Thank you for playing a part in trying to make this a safer and literally more livable world for all of us. This is the time in the service when we say together our covenant. From the first time that I read this covenant, it was clear to me the brilliance of the community effort this congregation went through to write it, to compose this covenant out of the life of this congregation. But it is all the more brilliant to see how applicable and relevant it is in circumstances like these. For those of you that know the covenant, even those of you who are not here in the room with me, I invite you to say it with me. And for those who do not know it, to join us in listening. We are a people of faith and hope. Together we covenant to strive to become our better selves, to honor both the critical mind and the generous heart, to prove that diversity need not mean divisiveness, and to respond to systems of violence and oppression with the power of a love beyond belief. Every Sunday, a favorite part of this service is the sharing of joys and concerns. We have a rippling bowl around which we gather and in which we place stones and shells, carrying our joys and concerns in silence and sharing them with one another. We are not physically here together to do that today, but we are going to take a space of silence. And I want to ask you in this silence to hold one another in your hearts and in your minds. Joys shared are multiplied, and sorrows shared are lessened. In silence, let us hold one another's joys and concerns. I've been told that in television there's nothing worse than dead air, and long silences are anathema to video production. But the religious life and the spiritual life are lives of paradox, especially in a UU context where we do everything upside down. Thank you for sharing silence over these means today. What is possible here? I was sitting in a homeless shelter in Atlanta many years ago now. I was a college student, and as part of an immersive, hands-on educational experience, one where we were meant to go into the field and to engage within particular contexts for our learning, service learning and hands-on learning, I had made my way to Atlanta to live for a space of time in a homeless shelter, working with the staff there and with those who were residing there and out in the community, in the neighborhood surrounding the shelter. I recall vividly one night sitting in the living room of the shelter in conversation with one of the men who lived there. We could not have been more different. I was a young, white, upper middle class college student brimming with the joy and energy of a life in front of me. And he was older, homeless, poor, black, without much formal education. We were so different from one another. And I was on a tear. I was so excited to be talking with him. I was talking about a philosophy class that I had taken the semester before. A brilliant professor who I love and who is still a friend and mentor of mine, now more than 20 years since I took the class. And at the conclusion of this class that I enjoyed so much, the professor had written on the board his take on the meaning of life. 4 simple words. And when he wrote them on the board, they became emblazoned on my mind. I can remember the moment and the look of the chalk on the board. We were still using chalkboards then. And I remember the energy I felt, the lift in myself to see these 4 words written, such a clear encapsulation of what life was about. Love more, fear less. And so talking with this man in the homeless shelter, I was going on and on about all of these world philosophies with a heavy Eurocentric slant, and talking about all this stuff that I had learned, how wonderful the class had been. And the summation of it all, love more, fear less. And he looked at me with kind and clear eyes and said very simply, one sentence to balance an entire semester of philosophical learning. He said, yes, but a little fear can be a good thing. That man had lived a life about which I knew nothing, and he had made it up to that point. If he has survived to this day, and I have no knowledge of that, no way of finding that out, if he has survived to this day, imagine his vulnerability if this pandemic spreads further. It is strange to have been talking this month about being a neighbor and to suddenly find ourselves distancing from one another. It is strange to be talking this month about environmental action and the local acts that we can do just where we are to have a global effect on the health of the world environmentally, only to suddenly be halted in our reflection by the spread of a global virus. It is strange to have designed a dialogue for today, after today's service, the third in a series of congregational dialogues, and the culmination of thinking together all about our social justice program of work. Dialogue that is itself an exercise in connecting and listening and caring for one another, engaging with one another on an intimate level. And suddenly, for that very care for one another, our very connectedness to one another, our desire to be with each other and to listen to each other and to speak with each other, all of a sudden, for all of that to be the cause for us not to meet. So I want to thank you and to apologize to you for this inconvenience. I know that this is a disruption, and I feel it too. The decision to stop our gatherings runs counter to all of my instincts. I brace at the thought. It is not what I want to do. We are on a run. We have so much going on here, so much that is before us, so much that is possible. And to stop it cold is abrupt and disheartening to me. And yet in the last few days, and especially over the last 48 hours, in a cascade of messages, we have heard from the Unitarian Universalist Association nationally and regionally, and from our sister congregations in the region and around the country, and from civil authorities, and from many health organizations and individual medical practitioners, some in our own congregation. And the message that they have all sent us repeatedly has been absolutely clear. Limit social gathering to stop the spread of the virus. It is out of care for one another that we have done that. We care about one another, and we want everyone to be safe and well. We are willing to act too conservatively, to be too safe, rather than risk the opposite. Our hope is that this will pass quickly and mildly with little impact. But it is possible that it will not, and we will address that together. Slowing the spread of the virus, to try to stop it, and to relieve stress on our healthcare system is an act of care for each other, an intense and realistic awareness that we are radically interconnected with one another, that we do affect one another, and that we want to do our best to help one another. Love more, fear less. And yet there is fear. It spreads too in advance of the virus, and its effects can be stark. Markets crash. Xenophobia rises. Blame and anger govern us. When we see leaders downplaying what is possible in this pandemic and not adequately providing resources to care for the most vulnerable and to stop the spread of the virus, I perceive fear. Fear as avoidance and denial. And ironically, the consequences of acting out of that fear equal increased spread and greater impact. We cannot allow our fear to dictate our actions. Love more, fear less. But a little fear can be good. Our fear can awaken us and motivate us. It can spur us to acts of self-care and compassion. If we hold our fear, if we're aware of it without being overwhelmed by it, we can work with it very effectively. Limiting the spread of the virus is a good thing, born of our concern for one another. And that, even in its disruptiveness and inconvenience, is quite beautiful and quite powerful. This is the challenge posed to us all by this virus. A challenge that this virus asks of us, and which I want to ask of you. I want to ask you to take this on as our work as a congregation for however long or short this pandemic lasts, for however long or short all of the other work that we've been doing and that we have had to stop, however long that is put on pause. This is the challenge. How do we connect with each other in order to care for each other, even when we must limit our physical contact with each other? Are there ways to draw closer together, even when separated by physical proximity? Can our fear motivate us to act in the power of love, in our care for one another, without giving into panic and prejudice and overwhelm? Care is the heart of our congregation. We care for one another and for our world. A pandemic like this and the measures required to respond to it only summon us to care more. What is possible here, epidemiologically, is the cause of our fear. The charts, the graphs, the maps tracking transmission, the articles, the endless urgent emails, the pronouncements, the thoughts of the people that we love, all of that can overrun us. A little of that fear can be good, to get our attention and to get us moving. But giving in to the fear is not. We must hold our fear with something greater, so that our real worry and concern for one another motivate us to act in ways that are wise, compassionate, and effective without losing our heads. We must hold our fear with something greater, so that it does not overwhelm us and lead us into prejudice and disconnection and foolishness and cause us to lose our hearts. May we hold our fear in the greater compass of our love, and with the beauty and power of our love for ourselves and for one another, may we act to connect with one another even when separated by physical space. This is the work before us, to connect with one another. Connect in care and concern with one another. Call, email, message one another. Hold one another in your attention. Hold one another in your hearts. Meditate on one another. We know in ways both practical and mystical that giving our attention to one another, caring for one another, connecting with one another even across great distances, can make strange and wonderful things happen. May we be people who do this always, and may our separation from one another now summon us to perfect this art. This is what is possible here and now. Our deeper connection with one another, despite our separation. Our deeper connection is what is possible. And sacrilegious as it is to say it, this is what the virus is asking of us. How will we connect with one another, even when we are apart? May we affirm, with our care and concern and many forms of connection, more than I can name, may we affirm our love for one another and for our radically interconnected, fragile, and fearful, beautiful, beloved world.
Over the past couple of days, a poem called Pandemic has shown up frequently in my social media feeds. Each time it shows up, I read it again, and I think, yes, all of this. How much better would these upcoming weeks of uncertainty be if we could all lean into the words of this poem? The Chicago Tribune gave some background on this poem and the story of it. Lynn Unger sat down at her kitchen table on Wednesday afternoon because a friend had posted that we needed some poetry during this anxious time. She spent time thinking about the concept of social distancing that we have all been encouraged to embrace. She asked herself, how do we physically distance ourselves without emotional distancing? She realized that this is not an act of emotional disconnection, but exactly the opposite. It is what we do out of a sense of community and compassion for the vulnerable. Then she wrote. Little did I know it was written by a UU minister. And little did I know Scott would ask me to read it for you this morning for the extinguishing of the chalice and the benediction. Listen to these beautiful words by Reverend Lynn Unger. Pandemic. What if you thought of it as the Jews consider the Sabbath, the most sacred of times? Cease from travel, cease from buying and selling. Give up, just for now, on trying to make the world different than it is. Sing, pray, touch only those to whom you commit your life. Center down. And when your body has become still, reach out with your heart. Know that we are connected in ways that are terrifying and beautiful. You could hardly deny it now. Know that our lives are in one another's hands. Surely that has come clear. Do not reach out your hands. Reach out your heart. Reach out your words. Reach out all the tendrils of compassion that move invisibly where we cannot touch. Promise this world your love, for better or for worse, in sickness and in health, so long as we all shall live.
We have spent time together, and these holy moments give us strength to go down the winding road until we meet again. We have spent time together, and these holy moments give us strength to go down the winding road until we meet again.
Thank you,